Hello, everybody. My name's Karen. For those of you that don't know me, Hayden and I have been part of this church for quite a long while. I was pastor here for a while, but come back into, we're back in the church now worshipping, and last Sunday I was here and we talked about actually how Jesus sits in our narratives, in our stories. So it was awesome to hear some stories shared with us today. Thank you. And thanks for the privilege of being able to sit in it with you. Now, just in case probably the online people can see better than the in-life people, I do have a 2-centimetre cut and many stitches on my lip. I had a lump removed in the week. I'm just going to say it up front because I don't think I'm looking quite as sparky. I probably won't be as smiley or as animated as I usually am. It was booked for ages ago, but COVID interfered with that, so it ended up being slap bang in the middle of 2 preaching engagements. I wrote the sermon before I had the general anaesthetic. It should be sound. But if anything looks dodgy, we'll just put it down to that, okay? If ever words could incite a strong emotional response in me, and not in a good way, they are words that have to do with the time I spend with God. When people ask, how are you going with your time spent with God? Or how do you go about spending time with God? And for more years than I like to acknowledge, I really felt quite inadequate when it came to this sort of area. I felt quite deficient. Now, I just want to be really clear and say, first up, I do think that spending time with God is extremely important and transformative. It's only because of God that I breathe, that my life has the shape and the meaning that it does have. So my issue with it was never like, yeah, really, does it matter or not? It wasn't that. It was just, I struggled with, I guess, what I thought about as what I believe were the right ways to be spending time with God. And for so long, I just found myself inadequate when I judged myself with regards, committing to the right ways of spending good time with God. Now, these right ways, they were practices I learned as a child and when I first came to faith as a teenager. And they were practices taught to me by good, even wise, well-intentioned and kind people who were teaching me how to follow Jesus. And, I did try very, very, very hard to practice the practices that were being taught to me. I really did try very, very hard. But inevitably, I failed to stick to the program. And, then would come the shame and the guilt and the feelings of inadequacy. And the way my personality is, that meant it fostered a kind of double down in me. Okay, messed it up this time, I can do it next time. They say burn it down or double down. Well, I went to double down every time. Just need to try harder next time. I just need to try harder next time. But it turns out that any time approached with gritted teeth and white knuckles and an I can do this attitude is pretty much never quality time. I can tell you that for sure. So I started to look around to see what I could learn about spending quality time with God. And some 50 years or so later, I'm glad to say that I do think I have learned some things. And that's what Josh has asked me to speak about today. So, some of the things that I have learnt are from the old traditions. The people of generations, Christians of generations ago, many, many generations ago. And for me, it's things like learning to pray with imagination through Bible verses. It's things like the prayer of examine. You might have heard these things, you might not have. Lectio Divina, Visio Divina, so visual images and getting close to God in that space. The labyrinth prayer, silence, contemplation, reflection. These ancient traditions. And I wanted to give a little ad there. If the idea of these ancient traditions appeals to you and it's not something you know a lot about, then please ask. There's so many resources and so much wealth in the tradition of people who have gone before us. Earlier this year, a few of us ran a retreat for, it was just women at that time, out of across Perth actually, and we practiced some of those things. And I'd love to run it again for men and women. If you're interested in spending a weekend looking at some of these practices, then please let me know and register your interest in that. So I have learned a lot about good quality time with God by looking back. I've also learned a fair bit about quality time with God by looking around. So it's kind of in the present, from the company of others. So let me give you some idea of what I mean. My parents taught me that God is love. And God's love, they taught me, is not expressed in finger-wagging authority, pointing at me for not getting it right, tut-tutting because I didn't read the Bible long enough or every day or praying quite the right ways. My children reinforced this for me, reminding me again and again, in good ways and not so good ways, that we don't need to be perfect to be completely loved. My grandkids, our grandkids, remind me of the nature of Jesus when they describe him to me in terms of the characteristics of good, kind, and safe people they know. So interesting. Ask a little one, so what's Jesus like? My grandkids describe him to me in terms of the good, safe, and kind people they know. My grandkids have also reminded me of the nature of Jesus when they tell me, when sometimes I'm perhaps grunting a little bit at picking them up, that they'll carry me when I'm old, because I carried them when they were little. My creative friends, they've opened my eyes to the quality of time with God when I'm making or drawing or walking or singing or dancing. And my super pragmatic friends, I've got some awesome pragmatic friends. I'm probably a little bit that way myself. You know, they've helped me to recognise quality time with God in the doing good. You know, in the good work that helps individuals and communities flourish. And then I've got a whole pile of friends and family that I didn't know how to describe, but I can best say to you, I've got friends and family who have done life tough and who have done life, I should put it the other way around, I have done life very differently to them. And they've gone down some pathways that haven't been sort of the pathways that I have walked down. And there's some incredible value in those relationships because they have reminded me again and again and again that relationship with Jesus and quality time spent with God is not something you can neatly box up and say, this is what it looks like. And you'll all do it like this, and that's the way that it's going to go. It is not a one-size-fits-all experience, spending quality time with Jesus. You can never, ever describe your relationship with God or the time you spend with God according to some sort of 4-point, 6-point, 10-point, 2-point checklist. It's just not how it goes. There's too much variety in who we are. Relationship isn't like that. Okay, so tradition and the company and experiences of my community, they've all shown me what it means to spend quality time with God. And where I want to go for the rest of today, I have learned about the real meaning of quality time with God from Jesus, from the stories of his life and from my own Holy Spirit-mediated experience with him over the years. So this morning, I want to invite you to consider with me what Jesus shows us about spending good time with God. And we're going to do that by looking at just a few verses from Matthew chapter 11. But I need to give you a bit of context before we open up at chapter 11 and starting at about verse 25, I think. So the context for this little story unfolding is that Jesus has, by this time, in the way that Matthew tells the story, he's experienced from his contemporaries a lot of resistance, a lot of ridicule, and a lot of opposition, both about who he is and what he has come to do. So that's already well established. And, you know, this opposition has come from the leaders and the teachers, the rabbis, the leaders in the community, the very people that he might be thinking should have their ears open and their hearts open to be looking for, to be hearing about the kingdom of God and the coming Messiah, but they didn't. And I can imagine that was very disheartening for Jesus. The wise ones, the learned ones, the ones who he would have thought are on the lookout for him and the kingdom, yeah, they weren't getting it. So where we pick up the story, though, it seems as if Jesus has suddenly had this moment of clarity when he realises the unexpected way that God was working. And where we're going to start reading now, he makes this spontaneous prayer of praise. It's in Matthew 11. It'll be on the screen, or you can follow it in your Bible or on your device there. So Matthew 11, starting at verse 25. At that time, Jesus prayed this prayer. "O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, thank you for hiding these things from those who think themselves wise and clever, and for revealing them to the childlike. Yes, Father, it pleased you to do it this way. You know, for as long as Jewish history went back, probably all human history to be honest, the pursuit of wisdom was something that was held up to high regard. You know, it's good to be wise. And there was a long-held understanding amongst the Jews that anyone who gave their life over to studying the law and debating its finer path was set on an inevitable pathway to gaining wisdom and, this was the big claim, knowing God. They could claim to know God because of that pathway that they were on. Now, Bishop Tom Wright, I love reading his commentaries. He says that this pursuit of wisdom and this ultimate knowing of God would have been a goal as far removed from the average person in Jesus' day as maybe the idea of being a brain surgeon or a test pilot, or maybe for you, the idea of being a teacher, heaven forbid, or, it was far removed. It wasn't what regular, ordinary people did. It was far removed from the everyday. Because you had to be super academic, you had to be proficient in different languages, you had to have read all sorts of classic literature, and probably the most telling thing, you had to be well off enough that you had the time to do the reading, to sit around, to have the discussions, to make the debate, to look at the finer points. So, you had to be quite comfortable in your life to be able to pursue this lofty goal of wisdom and knowing God. All right, so Jesus' contemporaries, they held wisdom and the ultimate knowing of God in very, very high regard. But in this little prayer that we just read, Jesus thanks God that knowing God is not at all like his contemporaries make out it is. Instead, knowing God is about relationship. Just like a child knows her parents because she lives with them, Jesus knew God by living with him. So Jesus is looking at all the apparently wise and the well-read and the learned leaders claiming to know God and his ways, and he has a moment of startling clarity, realising that they were getting nowhere. The wise ones, the learned ones, they weren't getting anywhere. Instead, it was the children. It was the tax collectors, it was the sex workers, it was the ordinary mums and dads and all the people that the teachers and leaders would have just clubbed together under that banner, sinners, that were actually getting to know God. And that was simply because they were getting to know Jesus. They were spending time with Jesus. So Jesus thanks God for the way he's turned things upside down. Then he turns and he talks to the people, and he says this to them in verse 27. My Father has entrusted everything to me. No one truly knows the Son except the Father, and no one truly knows the Father except the Son, it's a bit circular here, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Eugene Peterson in the Message translation has paraphrased this verse like this. He says, Jesus resumed talking to the people, but now tenderly. Jesus did that so often, especially when he was talking to vulnerable people. The Father has given me all these things to do and say. This is a unique father-son operation, coming out of father and son intimacies and knowledge. No one knows the Son the way the Father does, nor the Father the way the Son does. But I'm not keeping it to myself, Jesus says. I'm ready to go over it line by line with anyone willing to listen. Now, I reckon it's really easy to skip over just how radical those words would have sounded to people in Jesus' day. And to be honest, it's probably easy for us to skip over just how radical those words might actually be to us, to our neighbours, to our work colleagues, to our family. Think about it. Jesus is saying you will know God not because of your impressive book learning or your above average spiritual capacity, or in direct proportion to your age, or the number of hours you've spent in prayer and Bible study. You will know God not because you've kept all the rules or you were born into a religious family. You will know God, says Jesus, because God and I know each other, and I can actually introduce you to him. Isn't that beautiful? Remember that old adage? It's not what you know, but who you know. And I'm not, anybody that knows me, I love academic study. I'm not downplaying the importance of knowledge and study. It is important. I just want to say today that what Jesus says is it's not the primary way of getting to know God the Father. The primary way of getting to know God is to know Jesus Christ. That's the primary way. Okay, so back to the passage. And we can see that what happens next is that Jesus makes, I think, an incredible invitation. So Matthew 11, 28 to 30. Then Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." Okay, easy to bear. Don't want to hear disrespectful, but I often have read that word over the time and thought, I don't know, I've got a different definition of easy to you, God. And it's been interesting to do a bit of reading around this and find that some commentators suggest that easy is not the best English translation. Perhaps a better word to reflect the Greek could be kind or good. So the work Jesus calls us to and the way of living Jesus calls us to is kind and good rather than easy. I think there's some merit in thinking about it like that. I mean, let's face it, for those of us who've done any walking with Jesus does mean doing some hard things. It just does. Especially when we are called to address injustice or called to address some of the heavy and ugly brokenness in ourselves. So walking with Jesus does mean doing some hard things, but I tell you, it also means taking naps and enjoying a sunset and being with friends. We're going to see more about that in just a moment. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Jesus says, "Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. Come to me," says Jesus. Like a mother comforting a little one, Jesus says, "I know you are tired. I know you're tired. I can see that you're worn out. I get that the difficulties of this age are weighing you down, perhaps to the point of despair. It's hard to live through a pandemic, and even more so when many people don't. It's disorienting to realise that for those of you that follow Jesus, that people don't look for solace to God and the church that you love so much like they once did. That's disheartening. It's soul-destroying to be overlooked or mistreated because somehow you are not the right sort of human being. Wrong gender, wrong skin, wrong sexuality, wrong politics, wrong bank balance, wrong citizenship status. It's heartbreaking to be separated from people you love. And even worse when that is because of choices that you have made along the way. It's agonising to live with poor mental or physical health. It's insufferable to feel so lonely. Come to me, says Jesus. I'm not going to judge you for being tired or overwhelmed. I'm not going to shake my finger at you like a really cranky school teacher or a legalistic judge. Apologies to the wonderful school teachers and awesome judges we have in our society. The image just came to mind. And far from boasting about himself when Jesus says in that verse that he's humble and gentle, Jesus is reminding us that all the goodness and mercy that are essential to who he is what he will meet us with when we come to him. Not the finger wagging. The mercy, the humbleness, the gentle heart is what he will meet us with when we come to him. Come to me, says Jesus. So quality time with God is first of all this. It's coming to Jesus. And it's climbing into his lap to be comforted by the one who knows we are tired at times and overwhelmed and afraid. So when was the last time you heard, or have you ever heard, Jesus say to you, I know, and I love you. Come to me. Come to me. I want us to take just a minute now to have a little bit of a think about that. We can leave the sermon for a minute. It's not much longer to go. But what if we just take a moment now to consider that invitation? I've got some words here I've borrowed from a lady called Sarah Bessey, who wrote a prayer, when she was contemplating this invitation of Jesus. So let's get comfy for a minute. Take a moment just to be aware of how you're feeling as you sit on your seat, your feet on the floor, the breath in your body. Eyes open or closed, whatever's comfortable. Let's give ourselves a few minutes. And consider these words as if Jesus is saying them to all of us today. Come to me. You are already so loved. I don't need you to be productive, and you don't have to change the world. You are already so loved. You don't have to be smart. Hey, you don't have to be simple either. You are already loved. You don't have to conform to someone else's ideas of holy or acceptable. You can be full of doubt or feel as certain as you can be. You are loved. And did you know nothing that you do is going to move the meter of your belovedness? It's not going to move it up and it's not going to move it down. I will not love you more because you are finally out of debt or influential or tireless now. You've got nothing to prove or earn. You don't have to love or even like yourself. Hey, you don't even have to feel loved. You are loved. You are so loved. Now, for sure, my love will transform you, and it's going to transform you in every way, and there will be work for us to do. But I want to say again, you don't have to have done that work. You don't have to be transformed for me to love you. I love you because you're here. I love you because you draw breath. I love you because you are my Father's child, and your name is etched into the lines of his hands. You are so loved. Just come with me. Just come with me. God is sheer mercy and grace. He is not easily angered. He's rich in love. He doesn't endlessly nag and scold nor hold grudges forever. He does not treat us as our sins deserve, nor pay us back in full for our wrongs. Psalm 103. How wonderful to be invited to come to a God like that. How wonderful. So that's the invitation that Jesus makes for us. The first part of it is this, to come to him. But there's a little bit more in there as well, if you've skipped on and had a look. So verse 29 says, take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Okay, so clearly, this is what I mean about that argument about the word easy. Clearly there's a yoke to wear, a burden to bear. Okay, so there's clearly some tough stuff to do. Now, if that word yoke is just a little bit alien for you, as it well might be 2,000 years on, it worked well in the context of the time, really you can just think about it in terms of what I've just said. There is work to do. There will be a load of sorts to carry. There will be a burden to carry. But what Jesus is trying to say is, in the company of himself, this work is good work. And it's kind and bearable work. And in that famous, some of you might be quite familiar with it, the Eugene Peterson paraphrase, he says, walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it, learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I'm not going to put anything ill-fitting or unbearably heavy on you. Keep company with me and you will learn to live freely and lightly. Okay, so this is the invitation goes like this: come to me, and then there's those other two bits: walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it, Jesus said. So how did Jesus do life? Now, before I go into this, I just want to say that what I'm about to say to you is not a prescription for how you should live your life. It's not, Jesus did so I must do these things, but it is descriptive of the sorts of things and rhythms and patterns and focus that you might have in your life, okay? So a bit like we said last week, you might not be asked to give up your home, but there's a description there for us to have a think about it. How does my life reflect this description? So not prescription, but description. Jesus says, watch how I do it, and I've asked the question, well, how did Jesus do life? And here it is. When I look at the stories of Jesus, how I might describe how he did life. He ate with people. I can do that bit. He took naps. He washed feet. He went to the houses of tax collectors. He talked, heaven forbid, to women and children. He knew his neighbours. He enjoyed the beauty of the mountainside and the olive grove. He went to parties. He made good wine and he ate grain pulled fresh from the stalk. He touched lepers and he sat with people who were out of their minds. He spent time with huge crowds and he spent time alone. He barbecued fish on the beach. He learned to make things out of wood. He listened to people. He did not defend himself against authorities, but he did defend others. He got angry when people were treated badly. He stood up for the vulnerable. He prayed and he worshipped. He cried. He enjoyed the company of his friends, and he walked amongst the everyday people of the villages a lot. He spent a lot of time with the everyday people in his communities. So walk with me and work with me, says Jesus, for my yoke is easy to bear and the burden I give you is light. Okay. So here's what I learnt about spending quality time with Jesus when I look at the stories of Jesus and I think about my own experience with him over the years. The first thing is this: quality time is a way of life, an attitude of my mind and a leaning of my heart. Quality time with God is a choice to go to him like a child might go to a good parent. It's being honest with him about how I'm feeling. It's being free to lament, to cry, to grieve, to yell, to wail, to curl up in a defeated ball in his company. But it's also being free to celebrate, to party, to laugh, to praise and applaud, to run and dance in his company. Quality time with God is a choice to take his hand and to walk with him into each new day, taking on that kind and good work he invites me into, the kind and good work that actually transforms me and in Jesus' name brings hope and healing and restoration to the communities that I live in. That's the yoke. That's the burden. Sometimes hard, but it's good and it's kind and it's bearable with Jesus. So I can say to you, as a 60-year-old, that quality time with God is no longer something I schedule into my day as a task. It might be different for you. This is my personality, my experience. It is not a task on my to-do list anymore. It was for a long, long time. Did not work out well. I realise now that it's not something that only the learned and the wise or the specially called or the retired, because they've got all this time, can do really well. It's actually a daily acceptance of Jesus' invitation to come to him. Those three things: come, walk and work, whatever season of life that you are in. And of course there are some disciplines and practices that are part of that coming and walking and working. I'm not saying that. There are definitely disciplines and practices, but they are not my goal. They shouldn't be our goal or our focus, and they change from time to time according to our circumstances. You know, the mother with 4 kids around her, little kids around her ankles, is probably not going to spend 3 hours studying the Bible. I don't think that equals that she doesn't have quality time with God. These things are tools. They mustn't be the focus, I think. And so I've tried to live now with my goal or my focus being that daily opportunity or that daily response to the invitation of Jesus to come, to walk and to work with him. And I can tell you that even when the coming and the walking and the working is hard, I found it still to be the best fit. I found it to be the kindest fit, a good fit. So what do you make of that invitation? There's 3 aspects to it really: the come, the walk and the work. What do you make of that invitation? I'm going to ask the band to come back up, and I've got a couple of questions while they are doing that for you to have a think about or reflect on. It's really easy, isn't it, when you come into spaces like this and you get inspired and you hear some, hopefully, well, we heard some wonderful stuff already, even if I didn't get up to speak. And we've sung some great worship, and you sometimes have that experience of, I'm going to remember that, I'm going to do something about that. But let's take a moment to be deliberate and intentional in that space. So I've got 3 questions for you as the band gets some music ready for us. We'll contemplate for a bit while some music plays, we'll sing, and then I'll close out the service afterwards. But the questions are these. When you think about what you've heard today, can you hear Jesus' voice in any of it? And don't just say yeah or no. If yes, what? Where do you think you might have heard Jesus' voice in what you heard today? So did you hear Jesus' voice in anything that you've heard today? Maybe from the testimony earlier, the worship songs, the message just now. And if so, can you be really specific about what it is that he has said to you today? Can you hear Jesus' voice? If so, what did he say? And then the third question, what are you going to do about that? Let's take a moment to think. As Ash and the team lead us in this beautiful song of praise to Jesus, King Jesus, will you sing with that open heart? What are you saying to me, Jesus? What do you suggest I do about that, Jesus?